Hey BookTube! Tonight I'd like to take you to the world of Berlin in 1929, so during the Weimar Republic. And I want to tell you about the first in a series of crime novels by German author Volker Kutscher. And this first novel is called in English Babylon Berlin. The original title in German is Der nasse Fisch, or The Wet Fish, which, as you learn in the novel, is the name they give to cold cases in the police. And so this novel was first published in German in 2008. The English translation was published in 2016 in the UK, and it reached North America last year. And so far, the first 3 books of the series have been translated into English. So there's this one, there is The Silent Death and Goldstein, and there is a 4th book translated into English coming out later this year in May, called The Fatherland Files. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So the first crime novel of a series, and so far in German there are 7 books that have been published. And this book takes place, as I said, in 1929 in Berlin, and then each following book takes place in the following year. So far in German, he's reached the year 1935, and based on some interviews that I read about him, he wants to take his detective, Gereon Rath, who is the main character in all of these novels. So initially he wanted to take him to 1936 and the Olympic Games in Berlin, but on later interviews that he gave more recently, now he's talking about 1938, so just before the break of World War II. And one thing that is interesting about this series, and that the author has mentioned in interviews as well, is that there's a lot of crime novels or spy novels that are taking place during World War II, but there hasn't been a lot, or possibly even there has been no crime novels that have been set in the period just before, so during the 20s and the early 30s. And this is a period he was curious about exploring. Volker Kutscher has studied German history in university. He's also studied journalism, and he's worked as a journalist for a while before launching his career as a crime writer. And so he does, being a historian on top of being a writer, he does a lot of research to set himself and set the scene for his characters into the Berlin of 1929. So he will read the daily newspapers of that era to see what people were preoccupied with, what were the current events on the streets, what were troubling them. He has access to old maps of the time period, which he takes a look at. He will do lots of archival research in pictures, and so that is how he sets his stories in that time period in Berlin. And what inspired him to set his films, his books, in this period is he was inspired by some films, namely M and Metropolis by Fritz Lang, but also he was inspired by Döblin's Berlin Alexanderplatz, and also the works of Erich Kästner, which take place in Berlin around the 1920s, 1930s, and this was a time period he was interested in exploring literarily, with a literary device, and so he decided to explore that time period through the lens of a crime novel. He's also inspired by the classic American gangster novel as well, and he was interested in transposing that kind of story into Berlin. So, what's this book about, you might be wondering? Well, it's about Gereon Rath, who's a police detective from Cologne, and there's been a mishap in Cologne, and he's been transferred from the homicide department in Cologne to the vice department in Berlin. And he's very much eager to regain some status and to join the ranks of homicide in Berlin as well. And he falls by chance on a recent unsolved crime. So there's a car that's pulled from a canal in Berlin, and inside there's a dead Russian guy who's obviously not dead by the car accident because his hands and his feet have been smashed and tortured. and he recognizes this man as someone who was knocking on his door a few nights before the body is found. And so he decides not to inform his superior and to try to figure out on his own what happened in order to be promoted. And there's a lot of mishaps and misadventures that happen to him during his own investigation on the subject. And so he takes us into the underground world of Berlin of 1929. So he will go to clandestine bars where they serve you champagne with cocaine, like, you know, that's the most normal thing in the world. He gets in touch with criminals from the underworld. He tries to gather information as to who this guy is, why he was tortured, and what happened for his situation to happen. So, as for my own impressions, it took me a while to get into the story. I would say maybe 200 pages, and the book is 500 or so pages long. But then I couldn't put it down. I finished it about 2 weeks ago, and then I read for 2 hours on a Sunday. I took a break, and then I read for 2 more hours, and then I was finished because I really wanted to see how things would end for Guérin, but also for the characters in the novel. So I liked the characters and the intrigue. At some point I did feel like there were too many names and too many people involved. I had a bit of a hard time keeping track of everyone. But then I did a quick reread, and that clarified who was who and who was involved in what part of the plan, etc., etc. And then I gave actually a book club presentation on this book earlier this week in Ottawa. And while I was looking up various historical events which are depicted in the book, for example, they are talking about the demonstrations around May 1st in 1929, which were called Bloody May in Germany. And so in the articles about this event, the name Karl Zurgiebel came up. And this piqued my attention because this is also the name of a character in the book. And so I looked up his real-life counterpart, and I realized he had the same title and job description as the Zurgiebel in the novel. And so I decided to Google most of the characters to see if they also had existed in real life. And some of them actually did. There's also Ernst Genat, who is one of the main police department characters in the book. He also existed in real life. There's also Otto Bauknecht. He's only mentioned briefly as the police commissioner in Cologne in the book, and that was also his position in real life. And then Bernhard Weiss, who was also part of the Berlin police department, was also likely based on the real life persona of Bernhard Weiss. So I thought that was really interesting, this mixture of real characters into fiction. So yeah, there aren't just real-life events that are similar to the events of the book, but also real-life persons who are similar to characters in the book. And the book series itself is wildly successful in Germany. It has been translated at least partially into French, Italian, Spanish, Czech, Serbian, Japanese, Russian, Greek, Norwegian, Dutch, Turkish, Hungarian, and Danish. And English, of course, as I said at the beginning. I was lucky enough in my preparation. The author gave several interviews about this volume, but also about the other volumes in this series. A lot of the interviews were in German, and some of them were also in English. So I will link to those down below if you would like to have more insight into his research, his way of planning his novels, his series, etc. So you can take a look at that in the links below. Yes, so I mentioned the other books in the series already, and Kutscher, he's more interested in exploring, as I was saying, the twilight of the Weimar Republic than the Third Reich period itself. He wants to, it's his way of trying to understand what happened to the society of that era, why it fell into dictatorship quickly afterwards, because the Berlin of the Weimar era and Germany of the Weimar era was actually a quite modern society, and then everything got shut down by the Nazis. There's a few more things I wanted to tell you. Let me check my notes. This I said. All right. And finally, you probably know that this book was actually adapted into a TV series to much critical acclaim. It's a TV series that was co-produced by ARD, a public TV producer in Germany, and Sky TV, a private TV producer, and it is now available on Netflix. I think it's been available in North America since September 2018. And so far, it's the most expensive German TV series ever produced. It cost, I read, between 36 and 40 million euros. And so far, I've only watched the first episode of the TV series. I wanted to have an idea of what it looked like. And I already knew, based on my research, that the TV series was not a word-for-word adaptation of the novel itself. I knew that it was based on the universe that Volker Kutscher had imagined and based on his characters. So I was already pre-warned that it would be different, the TV series, from the book. And I can already see that it's quite different in the way some of the characters are introduced, in the way some of the key elements of the stories. In the book they come much later, but in the series they come right at the beginning. The way also the characters are both Gereon Rath and Charlotte Ritter are quite different on television as compared to their book counterpart. So my goal is to keep watching the TV series, and it was so successful that they've ordered 2 additional seasons. So far there are 2 seasons of 8 episodes, and there will be 2 more coming. So I will keep watching, and who knows, maybe I'll be inspired to make a comparison vlog between the book and the TV series. So I will leave you on this for tonight. I hope I've inspired you to take a look at this book series. I know for myself I will be reading the other volumes in the series because I'm intrigued. The next one, The Silent Death, is actually taking place in the film industry at the time when the switch between silent films and talkies, as they call them then, was made. So that's a universe that I'm interested in exploring as well. So I will keep reading. And on this, I will wish you a very nice Friday evening. Take care.